Hi again, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Loose Wheels, the auto racing podcast of CentralMaine.com. I'm Travis Barrett. I'm the auto racing writer at the Kennebec Journal and the Morning Sentinel. Happy to have you along. After a week's vacation that I believe was well-earned, we've got a huge show for you today. We've got a lot of good stuff today. We're going to catch up with Scott Tapley, who is... He still lives in Maine. I say he's from Maine. He spends more time out of Maine every week as the race director at Thompson Speedway and Stafford Motor Speedway in Connecticut, as well as at Riverhead Speedway, which is down on Long Island. That's what he does every week. So we're going to catch up with Scott. Scott's also the spotter for Cassius Clark, who's one of the favorites for the Oxford 250. The Oxford 250, as I don't have to remind you, is less than 2 weeks away. We have hit that crucial part of the summer. The last pass race prior to the 250 has been contested. It was at Speedway 51 in Groveton, New Hampshire, more affectionately referred to as Grove-Tona, where DJ Shaw, the series point leader, took the win there. So now all eyes are truly on the Oxford 250. And I think it was a good time to take some vacation last week. Had a lot of rain. Boy, Beach Ridge has had a heck of a time trying to get in there. 70th anniversary celebration, and Wiscasset's had a couple of weeks of trying to get events in and haven't quite beaten the weather. They've gotten some stuff. They had the 350 Super Modifieds there last week, and they got that in, but the Pro Stock feature was rained out, and just been kind of a weird week weather-wise here. So anyway, but it's not going to slow us down. We also have, all the way from Barnesville, New Brunswick, Lonnie Sommerville. I've known Lonnie for a long time. He's looking forward to running the Oxford 250, and so we're going to talk to him as well. But listen, find us on Facebook, Central Maine Sports. You can also find us centralmaine.com/sports. All the auto racing coverage is there. Of course, you can find Loose Wheels. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. Please do that. Share it with your friends. Tell everybody about it. We're the only podcast talking about auto racing in Maine. And also, we're international now because, as Lonnie told me earlier, they listen to me all the way in Canada. That makes us international. So, without further ado, we're going to get this week started, right? We're going to talk to Lonnie. Lonnie has run a couple of past races at Oxford. He ran the Open 100 for non-winners. He also ran the 150 a few weeks ago. Kind of get his thoughts on the Oxford 250, why the Oxford 250 is important. He drove full-time in the past North Series a few years ago for car owners Scott and Vicky Mulkern. He had a win at Beach Ridge. He also was good friends of Scott Frazier, who many will remember. Right around the year 2000, Scott kind of led that Canadian contingent every year in the Oxford 250. He was killed in 2004 in a snowmobile accident. Lonnie was good friends with him. But we talked to Lonnie because, again, the Oxford 250 is coming up. It's a race he looks forward to every year. And he talked a lot about why in Canada the race is so special, even though there are no tracks like Oxford Plains Speedway in Canada. So we're going to hear Lonnie's thoughts there. So here, let's just get to him. Here's Lonnie Sommerville on this week's Loose Wheels. All right, welcome back to Loose Wheels. We have Lonnie Sommerville all the way from, where are you? New Brunswick in Canada, huh? Is that where you're at these days?
Yeah, I guess so. Barnesville. Depends if sometimes it's Nova Scotia, they call me down there, but it's definitely New Brunswick.
Well, most of the people down here probably didn't take a lot of geography lessons, especially when it comes to Canada. But thanks for coming on. I appreciate it, man.
Man, well, it's, 3-4 months I've been teasing you about getting on here, and you told me I had to win a race or do something spectacular, and I haven't been able to do that, so I don't know.
Well,
you're just at the bottom of the barrel here, or what's going on?
Yeah, the first 5 people that I asked today all canceled on me, so you were the last one that answered my call. Actually, you're the only one that answered, so congratulations.
I can understand that. I've known you a long time.
Yeah. Hey, I want to get right into it with you in the Oxford 250. I know that already this year you've run a couple races at Oxford as you try to get your way into that race, but I'm always fascinated still by the level of interest north of the border in the Oxford 250. So it's kind of an open-ended question, but why is it such a popular race still amongst Canadian race teams?
For me, I mean, I have a lot of reasons that it's special to me. number one, I mean, from when I was a kid, I went down, we do a lot of racing up here and always have, and racing's in my family and grew up around the sport. So when I was a kid, we would go to the Oxford 250. That was our summer vacation. We would go in July, and I remember, it being like just so wicked hot down there. It was in the hundreds, and that was, for us was crazy because, even though we're only 5 hours north, it's never got that hot here, and that was part of the things I remembered. And seeing Junior Hanley and some of the local guys that raced from the Maritimes, from Nova Scotia and stuff. Clattenburg and Frank Frazier, and as I get a little older, Scott Frazier was a good friend of mine, and he was the guy that was going down there, with a shot to win the 250, and it just that's a big part of it. It's obviously, to me, the biggest race there is in North America. I mean, I think it's because I'm a northerner. I think it's a bigger race than the Snowball Derby.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the south would disagree with that. I think a lot of people in the north would agree. And also, $25,000, if anybody knows anything about the exchange rate, is a lot more than $25,000 Canadian. So that's a big draw. In saying that, it goes the other way too, and we have to spend American, our Canadian money into American. But it's just such a huge event, and just awesome. I mean, it's the last pass race we did here a few weeks ago at 51 cars for a just a regular pass race.
Yeah,
I mean, that shows what kind of a deal it is.
Yeah. Would you, if you, I don't know, I think too, like there's a lot of quote unquote big races in Canada now. There's a lot of 250 lap races that pay pretty well. Is it really just as simple as tradition and history when it comes to Oxford, that it still is able to trump some of these races that have only been around for whether it's 5 years or 10 years?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I think it's a competition is probably the biggest thing. I mean, for me, myself, I love competition. I mean, I want to go beat the best. I don't want to go to a watered down version of a 250. And I think, up here, the 250s up here, they kind of go up and down and up and down. They don't kind of stay consistent and kind of build like the 250 has. And, I look forward to, our 250 at 660 every year of, Ben Rowe and Johnny Clark and Travis and, Benjamin and those guys coming up, because those are the guys I want to beat. Don't get me wrong, there's lots of local guys that are good too. It's just, you race against those guys your whole career, it's not the same. I mean, it's no different than, Johnny Clark and Travis and these guys now I'm sure are excited that, Bubba Pollard's coming to the 250 because it's a big deal. If you beat Bubba Pollard, you had your stuff in order and your stuff was good that day, and you did a good job. So I think it's such a big event, and obviously the car count, is huge. So you have the best of the cars in the race, and if you don't make the Oxford 250, like we talked earlier, I feel it's if you're good enough to be in the show, you're going to be in the show. I mean, as long as you don't get a flat and something crazy happens, you get tore up in a heat race or something like that, it does weed out the mediocre cars, and the good cars usually all get in. Yeah. And I think that's the cool thing about it. It just makes such a good event that way, because it's not, watered down. The competition's not watered down any, and, it's Oxford 250. I mean, it's hard to explain unless you're a racer, I guess. And I say that because a lot of the fans from Canada go down. Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people that are going down. They go down to camp. I had a guy in here yesterday was making sure we were going, and he's heading down on Wednesday, and he's meeting a couple friends that he's met at Loudon, and they're going to camp there for from Wednesday on. And so it's not just the racers; it's the spectators up here are go to these races, and they get a kick out of this show and realize how big of an event it is. And same thing, a lot of history there. Yeah.
What's we were talking before we got started about, which I could not believe, but it's also a sign of me getting old, that it's been 23 years since Dave Whitlock won it in 1995, and he's the last Canadian driver to win it. And that ended a stretch of three in a row, because Junior had won it, and Derek Lynch won it, and then Dave won it, which I couldn't believe, because I feel like the Canadian presence in this race, along with some of the Southern New England guys and guys from all over the country, to me that was always, growing up, one of the best parts about the Oxford 250 was seeing who was coming. But so, kind of along that vein, like, so what is it? What's the challenges for a Canadian race team to win it? Is it simply numbers? Just whether it's such a small percentage of entries every year, or is it that there's no tracks up there that are similar to Oxford? Maybe, I guess what I'm trying to get at with you is why have you not won it yet?
Well, I ask that myself that every time I leave there, but I mean, we obviously have only run, I think, 3 Oxford 250s.
Yeah.
In the 20 years I've been racing. But I also think that there's a lot of variables there for that are kind of, I won't say against the the Canadian guys going there to have success, but part of one thing is, the guys that grow up racing in Maine, they have beach ridge and Oxford that are very similar. The momentum, that kind of racetrack. Yeah. We have nothing up here like that. I mean, I always tell people I grew up in the Scott Fraser era that you drive down into the turn, you see the ambulance lights turn on, and you lift, and then you smash the gas and drive off the turn. And that's when I went to Oxford for the very first time in 2002 or 3, whenever it was. Yeah. That's how I tried to drive the place, and I didn't know any better, and I had nobody to tell me any different.
Right. And, right.
We struggled. I mean, the first time we went, and it was the second time we went that we qualified, made the show, and had no business being there. I mean, we weren't. To me, we went there thinking we were going to try and qualify for the race, for the Oxford 250. We didn't go there thinking we were going to win it. Right. And when we qualified, I mean, that was huge. And we were actually the first New Brunswick driver. I think it was 2003. We were the first New Brunswick driver to ever qualify for the Oxford 250. Well, that's a pretty big deal to me, right? Sure. When I retire and I'm sitting back at 80 years old and looking at your accomplishments, that's kind of a cool thing. Yeah. And we finished 12th, and I did myself proud. I thought my team did a good job, and everybody that helped us get there, because it's a lot of money to get there. And back then, it was we looked for guys to buy a tire or 2 tires or whatever we could get, and it's a lot different now. We go there, like anybody, you go there thinking you can win, but when we go there now, I mean, if I don't run, make our stuff right, and we don't run top 5 and contend, then I'm disappointed. Yeah. And I think, the Canadian, that's kind of hurt the Canadian, community a little bit, because a lot of guys know how much it costs. I mean, our dollar right now is horrible. So you're losing 35 cents on the dollar. So if Johnny Clark or Ben Rose team's going to spend $10,000 for the Oxford 50, well, that's $13,500 for us. Yeah. And it's just the hotels, everything. Everything is a big deal. And it's a lot of unknowns when you go there. And we don't race in these tracks, but we do go down. That's why we did a few of these Oxford weekly shows and tried to run some past races down there this year. I've only raced once in Canada this year. Every other race I've raced was, other than Caribou, I guess we went to Spud Speedway. Yeah. Every other race was in Oxford this year in preparation. And, I don't know that people can commit to that, up here. Sure. If they want to race all the time, it's harder to cross the border now than it ever used to be. Now we're getting more paperwork to get across the border, so we're not getting in a situation like the 13 team did last year going to Florida or Hickory. There's just a lot of variables there, but I do believe in, there's a lot of good Canadian teams that are capable of going down there and running competitive and running up front. It's just, there's not as many. If you look at, the car counts that are down, in New England versus what we have up here, there's just not as many teams and not as many, financially stable teams, and the equipment's not as good and stuff like that. So I think you've got, a dozen teams that are up here that would be capable of going down and running. But when that's the only time they go and run, and more so up here, this tour that's up here, they run a different shock and a different tire. So you're kind of, behind the 8 ball a little bit. Yeah. And I think that's why, if I'm an hour away, I can go test at Oxford on, tonight, and I can make some changes. I can go back and test next week. Well, when I'm 5-hour drive to Oxford, I'm not going to go test for, a couple hours and try and make my car better. I've got to commit to going to a race, and it's a bigger expense, and I'm very fortunate to have, a car owner and a sponsor, with Pubs and Bob that allow me to do that. You know, and I think it's to me is an opportunity of a lifetime, and it's no different than when I ran for Scott and Vicky for 2 years. I mean, we were competitive everywhere we went. We were a top 5 car. We had a bad night, we ran 5th or 6th on a bad night. And it's not the same anymore when I go down there because I'm not used to running those tires. I'm not used to running with these guys anymore. It's some new drivers. And there's some better drivers, and some of these young guys are pretty damn good. So there's a lot of variables, but to me, I still feel there's guys that are capable of going down there and winning.
Yeah.
But you look back in like you talked about, 1993, 94, 95. I mean, it was the ACT Tour, which those guys, Whitlock and Hanley and Derek Lynch, and those guys raced on those same tires every week, and they raced with the same guys every week, and it was like like the past tour is now.
Yep.
So I feel if you had a few Canadians that ran full time in the past series right now, I think it might be a little different story. But I mean, who knows? I don't see it as a definitely a disadvantage being a Canadian. I just see it as a disadvantage being so far away.
Sure. Is this the most prepared you've been going into this race? I mean, even though you haven't raced a ton this year, but you've focused your efforts on Oxford, I wonder, is this the most prepared you feel as though you could be going into the 250, or were there years earlier where you really had a better handle on it?
Honestly, anyway. That's a loaded question because we struggled the last race there. I mean, we won our heat race and thought we were in pretty good shape, and then once the race started, the car just went so free. It was awful. I think I told you
that day during practice that you don't want to win the pole, and
you did.
Didn't I? We had the whole conversation.
Yeah, you can't tell a race car driver not to win a race. I mean,
it's funny because I was watching that race unfold, and I was like, you know what? We literally had this conversation 2 hours ago about sometimes the worst thing is like just go out and breeze out and win the pole, and you think, we're good, and you don't think at all about traffic and because you're like, we're good. So I felt like I jinxed you that day anyway.
It's true. Oddly enough, I don't know if it's weird enough, but I kind of thought of you telling me that about halfway through the race when I was hanging on and trying not to wreck. Well, I probably shouldn't be thinking about you when I'm out there racing. Maybe that was part of the problem.
I would not.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I got that off my chest because I was feeling really guilty.
We thought. I mean, that was our whole reason to prepare for Oxford and pick those races and do them and make the car right. And we basically have a car sitting here in front of me with the rear end out of it and the spindles off it, and we're changing spindles and we're changing a bunch of stuff. So as far as did it prepare us? It maybe prepared us that we know what we don't want.
Yep.
It didn't prepare us for, to have a car that we know we're taking back with that we know what we have. I feel like we're going to go back with a better race car. I'm confident in what were the choices we're making and the changes we're making.
Yeah.
I'm confident that it's the right way to go, or positive, we're making positive gains. But as far as, can I say I'm, Curtis Jerry, that I know exactly what my car is going to be and how it's going to race? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But,
all right.
Damn, it's Oxford. I mean, nobody does, right?
No, I think
it changes by the hour. So
I'm always amazed at how many cars are on the track in like that first 20 minutes of practice on like Friday, and just running laps and making changes. And I think to myself, man, we're a long way from not only the green flag in the heat races, but we're a long way from the green flag in the Oxford 250. And you just see teams already on Friday just beating their heads against the wall. And I always wonder. I don't want to say. Well, I do. I wonder why, right? Like, why do any of us do this? But more than that,
we all do that. Other than the guy that wins, pretty much everybody else is wondering why we do this. I mean, that's how racing goes. But why you do it is because most guys are racing's built off of egos, obviously.
Sure.
And we all go there thinking we're better than the next guy, and when you get beat by somebody, you think, well, I'm as good as he is. My car is better than his, or my stuff, my team is as good as his, and you go back next time thinking you're going to beat him, and that's what drives everybody in the sport is the competition level. So, they could go out on Friday. Part of it on Friday is the whole transponder thing, right? Everybody wants to bust a lap off and walk around with the chest stuck out. So that's typical, but it does. I mean, it rubbers up. The track rubbers up, and then they get all the other classes on there on Saturday and Friday night and Saturday night and stuff, and it just goes up and down and changes. And I honestly think if your car's right You know, I think there's some cars that have been down there, you know, like I said about Curtis, you know, he knows, he's confident in his setup and confident in his car and what he can do there. I'm guarantee he might go up and run some laps on Friday if he even shows up.
Right.
But he's not changing anything. Where the rest of us are all still searching for that, you know, that feel that we want, or to get that little bit of speed or whatever. You know, if there's 60 cars, you know, at Oxford this weekend or next weekend, there's probably 5 or 10 guys that are confident in what they have and they're going to leave it, and there's the rest of us are searching, you know, and I think that's part of it, you know, and I don't think you can ever get enough laps at that place, and just building information, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe people are running as many laps and not changing as much stuff, just building information, and which is important too. You know, a lot of times when you go testing, you might make 10 changes that only 2 make a difference that help, and the other 8 hurt you, but those other 8 someday down the road might help you. You know, and you know, that's kind of, for me, that's what I always tell my customers when I go testing with them. It's not about what you gain, it's about what you learn, and you know, it's not always gaining every time you make a change. It's just learning the driver and, you know, the team. So
that's got to be hard to do, and especially when, like we talk about, once you get into that weekend, right? Like, everybody feels the pressure. It doesn't matter who you talk to walking through the pit area at any point in that weekend. It's amazing to me how even on Friday, the pressure is the energy in the air is unlike even, you know, pick another past race that is a big. Well, there is none that's as big as this one, but it's just there's such an energy all weekend where everybody feels like everybody is stressed out. Probably because nobody slept in 4 days before you get there. Maybe that's what it is.
Well, yeah, the sleeping is part of it, and well, you said earlier how big a race this is. I mean, it's a big deal to Canadians. So, you know, how much bigger is it to the guys that grew up at this racetrack? You know, and grew up an hour away or 2 hours away, and you know, I'm assuming it's probably a bigger deal to, you know, all of you guys down there than it is to us, in a sense, because it's home turf, right?
Sure.
And you don't want anybody coming in and, you know, taking the win from you on your home turf. And so the stress level, I think, is huge for anybody, no matter what level your team is or what, you know, ability you got, your team has or whatever. It's just one of those races that I think it's stressful, but I think everybody adds the stress, you know, unnecessarily sometimes too, right?
Yeah. Is it true that you've been listening to this podcast since the beginning?
Well, I made you feel good. I've probably listened to a few of them. I haven't listened to every one of them. Most of them.
I knew you hadn't.
It's kind of a big deal. You're a household name now. So.
Yeah. Well, at the Sommerville household.
At the Sommerville household, we all still like you. So.
Barnstable, New Brunswick. Yeah. Well, that's good to know. I mean, hey, we're I guess we can say it's an international show now. Then, right? That's what I can say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, I'm going to do that.
Don't ask my wife if she's actually listened to it. I just tell her about it, and she smiles. So I don't think she's actually, you know, took the time to actually spend 5 minutes and listen to you on there. I'm not saying she wouldn't, and she likes you. She still likes you, I think. But
I think
I don't know
so.
if she'd actually take the time to listen to you.
I know my wife has never listened to it, so she's in the same boat.
Yeah.
We're all good.
Yeah. Well, when I talk to my wife about racing, she doesn't listen to me either. So.
Right.
Yeah. I have a funny story about that, actually. I took her testing here, probably about a month ago. We had a 100-lap at race in Fetterden at 660, and I was taking my Van Dorn car that I've literally raced once, and I, you know, need to go shake it down. And I said, well, I didn't have everybody go with me. You know, a couple of my guys were away, and guys were working, and so I just need to go shake it down. You know, so I loaded her and, you know, my 7-year-old and 8-year-old in the truck, and we went testing.
Oh my word!
And she was pretty stressed out, and really was having a panic attack. And luckily, I had a couple guys who were there camping at the racetrack, and came over and gave me a hand, and she was relieved of any duties. So she was. Anyway, so the other day I said something about going testing the customer's car, and she just told me she was not available.
I'm not available.
It's not available.
Wow. Yeah. It would have been better, story, if she told you she was going to go work for another team.
Yeah. Well, she does give me a hard time about not winning anything this year. So
wow.
I think she's kind of she's a tough one to sell. Sometimes she's gets a little. She's a little harder on me than I am myself, I think. So.
Well, see, that's why I've always liked her. See, I knew somebody has to keep you in line.
Yeah, that's right. There was a reason, right?
That's right.
Yeah, but it's not you.
Yeah.
Give me a grief about it. It's her.
No, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm just doing what she wants. That's why I give you a hard time.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, listen, I really want to thank you for taking a few minutes to do this. I know, it's a busy time of year, but it's always good to catch up with you. And I'm sure I'll see you at Oxford. Hopefully, I'll see you on the front stretch this time instead of in the back, over in the back pit area, lecturing you on how your race strategy should go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I probably not going to take your advice. If we can get a good draw and start on the pole, I'm probably going to still try and win that first heat race. So I'm still think that your theory on that's wrong. But I don't know.
Well, you know what? Hey, I'm going to give you one nugget, and then I am going to let you go. Here's one nugget. In the last 4 years, right, the last 4 Oxford 250s, 3 of the winners started 21st or worse.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. So Travis won it. The second time Travis won it, he started 27th. Glenn Luce, when he won it, started 22nd. And Kirk Gary, when he won it, started 21st. Only Wayne Hellewell, who started 4th, had anything that resembled a good starting spot in that race.
There you go. That is pretty good information. So,
that's what I'm here
for.
for.
So, like, if I'm leading the heat race, should I just roll up and go to the Consi, or what do you think?
I wouldn't go to the Consi, but I might give up 2 spots. So finish 3rd.
Yeah, okay.
That'll put you right in that top 24, right where you want to be.
Yeah.
Hey, listen.
I'm pretty sure there's not anybody in the field that's going to take that advice, but we'll see.
Well, we'll see. Hey, again, thanks so much, and it was great to catch up with you. We'll see you here in another week or so.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Lonnie for doing that. I really appreciated it. Always good stuff with him. And I think it's time already for TB's Press Box. I want to talk about Wiscasset Speedway. Race director Bill Acratelli stepped down midway through the season, citing some time. He wanted, he's also the girls soccer coach over at Spruce Mountain in Jay, and he's kind of torn in a lot of different directions. But and we're going to talk to Scott Tapley a little bit in a couple of minutes about this. But I think people don't understand what it takes for racetracks to put on a show every week, and I know I've talked about social media and kind of the negative influence there. But essentially, we are talking about people who volunteer their time. Sure, some of them get paid. They certainly don't get paid enough for all the hours and the grief they put in. And we're chasing a lot of good people out of racing because we want people to see it our way. Because we want people to blame when a night doesn't go our way. There's a lot of judgment calls when it comes to race directing. They're not always right. They'll be the first to tell you that. But you know what? A baseball umpire isn't always right either when it comes to balls and strikes, and you just got to live with it, and you move on, and you play the games. And in this case, you race the races, and you race your own race. And I feel like it's this time of year every year, man. It starts to grind on everybody. It's a long season. It's a hot summer. We get rain delays. There's just so much that goes on, and I think we get a lot of stresses at the racetrack, and you certainly see it. And I think for me, when we hear people accuse racetracks of playing favorites, when we hear of race directors leaving in the middle of a year because they just can't deal with it anymore, they don't want to deal with it, and frankly, they shouldn't have to deal with some of the stuff. I've seen, when feature number 2 rolls out onto the track and is getting going, there's drivers from feature number 1 tearing up into the tower at Wiscasset and just reading the race director of the riot act. There's a time and a place, and that's not it. And on Facebook the next day, spreading misinformation, and there's no place for that. And you're killing the sport that you love, and you're doing it yourselves. And sometimes, even when you don't see eye to eye, it's important to remember that these people are putting in a lot of time, and we're chasing them away. And there's not a lot of people left to fill those roles because A, they don't want to take it on, they don't have the time to take it on, or they don't have the passion for the sport. And we've got to be very careful. That we don't end up chewing this thing up and spitting it out before we even get a chance to see it to the end, if that makes any sense. One guy who feels very passionately about this stuff is Scott Tapley. And he's connected to the Oxford 250, having grown up in Maine, through his dad, and his dad's racing over the years. And now, as a race official himself, he's got a great story for you coming up about kind of how he got into being a race director and what it was that kind of sparked him. And he remembers the moment. He remembers the moment where he said, "This is something I want to do." And so that's a good story. I won't spoil it for you. Listen all the way to the end. It's worth it. Before we get to him, I just want to remind you again, we're centralmaine.com/sports. We're on Facebook, Central Maine Sports. We're on Twitter @CentralME Sports. And also you can find me on Twitter @TBarrettGWC. We'll let you know where we are every week. And, of course, with the Oxford 250 coming up, we're going to have tons of stuff. And certainly before the next issue of this Loose Wheels podcast drops, we're already going to be into Oxford 250 coverage. We just literally this afternoon had a meeting and kind of planned out what we're going to do next week. We've got some really good stuff, I think, and if you're not following along, you're going to miss out. So, buy a newspaper. All right, without further ado, let's get right back to it. This one's a little bit longer, but I think you're going to like it. Scott Tapley is a man who has passion. He has passion for stock car racing, and it comes through. And so here's Scott on this week's Loose Wheels. All right, welcome back. We've got Scott Tapley with us now on Loose Wheels. Scott, I want to thank you for taking a couple minutes. I can't believe you're not on the road driving somewhere as we speak.
Yeah, no, anytime. Sometimes I feel like driving is my only job.
Well, I'm sure the mileage rate is great. It makes it all worth it at the end.
Yeah, no, actually, I to do the math, I actually spend more time a week driving than I do actually calling races or doing websites. So it's not far-fetched, to be honest with you.
Hey, so I want to ask you about, as a guy that's from Maine, that's from the area, I think everybody now, once we get to this time of year, we all know what's on the calendar here in another 10 days or so. Do you have a favorite Oxford 250 memory?
I have a lot. I have a lot more. The thing is, it's weird. My biggest memories are the ones that are the most frustrating.
Yeah.
So, like, as a kid, I was with Bruce Haley and Bob Greeley in that team, and the whole Larry Gelinas year that he won, we actually felt like we won. It was kind of a weird situation. That was 96, I believe.
Yeah.
Benji was well on his way to winning in his first ever start. So that whole race, I guess I would say, is probably my favorite memory.
Yeah.
Even though it was a little frustrating too.
Yeah.
But the whole drama of the whole race, Benji's really, I say this to a lot of people. If he wins that race, I think his career takes goes in a whole different direction.
Yeah, I can see that. That's a good, that's a great point. Because he was head and shoulders above everybody that day. Oh.
Yeah, and it was really his first ever start, in the 250 in a pro stock, and at that time, that race could kind of make you. It could put you in a position to get a really top-notch Busch North ride.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He ended up getting like the 74 car, I think. Ran a couple years in that, but that wasn't really a competitive ride. But who's to say it didn't get him, in the O'Connor car or something like that Derek Lynch ended up being in at some point.
Sure.
It could have really changed his whole career. Just a couple laps of fuel.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's great. I do. Do we still not think Larry won that race? Is that still like?
Well, no. Okay. Yeah. So okay. I'll get into it.
Yeah,
so,
go ahead.
Obviously, me being... What's that?
I said, no, that's perfect. Yes, please get into it. That's what I said.
Yeah, no, so me being with the 22 car with Bruce, who's a longtime family friend, so that's where that whole relationship was. We kind of knew we were a lap down when it went off, how it worked out. But the way that they, was the old school scoring system. Mm-hmm. So it was people in the stands writing down numbers.
Yes.
Well, the track had sort of owned the fact that we weren't, so they kept us in the lineup in second and on the scoreboard in second, and then magically with 10 to go, we just disappeared from the scoreboard.
Oh my word.
And it wasn't it wasn't timing and scoring where the numbers just worked out that way. It was like somebody just said, "Oh wait, that car's a lap down." It was weird how it all played out.
Right.
and then obviously if Benji doesn't run out of fuel, there's never a question. But not to take anything away from Larry, he's actually, raced races that I've directed since then, and conversations that I've had with him since that point. But I think there's certainly some question to this day, how that still played out.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny because I think, again, now we're talking about 1996, so this was a long time ago for an old man like me. But I still seem to think that might have been the most shocked any winner of the Oxford 250 has ever been when they got out of the car. And I don't mean shocked like, I can't believe we won this race finally. I mean like, what the heck is happening here? How did I end up
because
here?
And the reason is because they didn't adjust the lineup. Like, there were several restarts. My memory may not be 100% correct on it, but I feel like it's pretty decent.
Yeah.
I feel like there were like 2 or 3 restarts where the lineup accurate, where like the 22 or our car was in second, I believe, on one of the restarts, Benji, and that was considered the lead lap car because it was on the scoreboard. And then all of a sudden it just was removed from the scoreboard.
Yeah.
We were still racing in our same position. So, yeah, I mean, I know for a fact that we ended up, Sandy Haley, Bruce's wife, ended up protesting the finish, brought the scorecards over, and all those things. And still at that point, I mean, we're talking about they've already done the victory lane and everything. Gelinas, you could tell, and their whole team was still like, are they going to take this away from us?
Yeah, right,
like,
right.
You could tell they still weren't really sure that this had happened.
Yeah. That's so if Bruce wins that race in 96, we don't wait another 5 years for the next, Oxford Plains Speedway weekly regular to win it when Gary Drew won it in 2001, right? So that 17-year stretch is now a 12-year stretch. So I think we need an asterisk. We need an asterisk in the official record book. You're not getting any of the money.
Yeah, well,
we'll put an asterisk there.
Yeah, that and Benji too. I mean, he would have been in that same spot. Yeah. Just the two left of fuel. So yeah. So I guess long and short, that and the Dave Dion and Dale Shaw side by side race.
Yeah.
I want to say that was 92.
Yes.
This is one of my earliest memories of the race, true watching a battle.
Yeah.
And remembering how cool that was to watch.
Yeah.
Those are probably two of the best. I
think it's one of the things though that I'm sure you would agree, and if you don't, you obviously tell me. But I think when I'm sitting here looking at a list of all the winners, right? And you see all the names, right? Mike Rowe and Ralph Nason and Ricky Craven and Jamie Obie and Jeff Bodine. We can go on and on. But what's amazing to me about this race is you see names like Larry Gelinas, and we all immediately remember what we remember about how that all went down. Like, just Larry's name makes us think about certain things. And even maybe I'm alone on this one because I at the time I was so heavily involved in covering the changeover to the ACT late models. But when I see Roger Brown's name I still get those same feelings come back, like, who's going to call me and complain about why this is a late model race and not a super late model race? But I think it's one of the neat things about this race is it's not always the big names that won it. Sometimes it's the guys who many people have probably never heard of, and you see their name and immediately you go, oh, I remember that, and I remember it for whatever reasons.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at just those races that you talked about. So Larry, you can look at other people that maybe should have won it or arguably could have won it. Yeah. The Roger Brown one, I think Sean Martin probably had the best car that day.
Yeah.
I think he had some sort of an issue mechanically. He led early, in all of Jeremy Wharf's year that he won.
Yes.
Kyle Busch, I think, was the best car.
Yep.
It just didn't play out for him, and that was his first year there. These races, to me, I feel like in the years that I've been watching it, so it's really 85 is probably my first real memory of it, and I've seen everyone since.
Yep.
I feel like the dominant car usually doesn't win. Like other than when Ralph won 3 years in a row, like he led almost, 3/4 of the race every time. He just kill everybody.
Yep.
Ralph Nason, that is. So I feel like, some of these other years, last year with us, with Cassius, led so much of it, and then Curtis Cherry just does everything you need to do to win the race. At the end. I think some part of it, the storylines of how it all plays out and how the fast car typically just doesn't, the dominant car doesn't get the job done. I mean, we could go right back to that 96 race.
Yeah.
Tracy Gordon was the class of the field.
Oh, yes.
We're never talking about Benji, or we're never talking about Bruce or Jelinus if Tracy doesn't have his issues.
Yeah.
So I think it's the storylines of the race that are so tremendous.
It's awesome, and I do think that one of the things that I dislike about covering these races year after year is I feel like so many of those stories get lost in, you have to report on the winner, you have to report on the stories that got the right, but all these other stories are so good, but you can't write 100 stories on every race, but you could, because they're there. I was thinking about what you just said about the best car never wins the race, and how I always felt like, even as a young guy going over and watching the race, like if a guy I didn't like led the first half of the race, I always reminded myself, like, everything changes in the last 100 laps of this race. It always does every year. And the Tracy Gordon example is a perfect example. 150 laps in, and then all of a sudden, everything changes. And so, that's, to me, it's, I don't know, it's such a fascinating event still. And I kind of want to lead that into my next question for you in terms of, spotting for Cassius for a race team out of Canada, which you're doing. We talked to Lonnie Sommerville on the podcast earlier, and I think, Canadian drivers and teams, they come at it from a different perspective, but it's still very important to them. And I wonder how much of that you and Cassius have sensed driving for Rolly's team.
Yeah, it's funny. Over the last few years, I've spotted, my first time spotting for Cassius was like 2009, I believe. Mm-hmm. I was living in Connecticut working for Matt Kovaluk, and he needed a spotter for Thompson. Mm-hmm. So I ended up doing it there, and I've been doing it on and off for, up till now. So, I guess it's almost 10 years now. So, the dynamics that we've seen, the different teams that he's been with, it's seen a bunch of them, his own team and Dickie Woodman's team, but this particular team that he's with, King Racing, Andrew Hicken and the whole team, their whole dynamic, the like how much in love with short track racing these guys are, like everyone on the team.
Yeah.
Like it to me, it sort of re-energizes me because, my day job, I guess, is to be the jerk at the racetrack, for lack of a better term. You're the guy enforcing the rules, and it can really break you down.
Yeah.
But when you get to go with these guys and you see their, how much they enjoy being at the racetrack and how much fun it is. Listen, running fast helps. Sure. If you're running 20th every week, that's the energy level isn't going to be there.
Yeah.
But I feel that's the same from all the Canadian teams. Like I watch these video clips from, the Atlantic Cat 250 or any of the other races that they have up there in Canada. The places are packed and people are really engaged. It just seems like the Canadian racing scene is almost, where it's at right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, their season's a lot shorter. I think that doesn't hurt. And I don't mean that to be flip. I think, like Lonnie and I were talking about, they don't start really till Memorial Day weekend, and they're essentially done Labor Day. There's a couple of races that kind of splinter, but I don't think guys have time to get as burnt out. And maybe I read it wrong, right? I'm not up there every week, but to me, I think that's a huge part of it. Is granted, they're dictated by the weather, cold weather late and cold weather early, but I feel like the schedule is a sweet spot for them. They don't overdo it, because I have another point here, which maybe we'll just kind of throw it at you because I know you can handle it. This is like, I don't know if you follow, but at Wiscasset, the race director walked away a couple of weeks ago after a rough night and stuff that had built up, and they had a nightmare there again last week with a guy running somebody over, after the checkered flag on the cool down lap. And I feel like this is the time of the summer every year without fail where everybody's nerves are frayed, people are tired, the heat is taking a toll. It's all of these things. Money is running low. I think the schedule is part of that. It's just inherent in the business. But I think in Canada, if we kind of go full circle with it, it's almost not long enough for it to get so out of hand that they lose enthusiasm week to week.
Yeah, no, I think there's certainly something to it. I mean, I live it every week at Stafford. You know, we're going to be going on, you know, if we get this Friday race in, it'll be 17 straight weeks without a rain out. Wow. So we've raced, you know, we haven't had a break at all.
Right.
And you can feel the tension. Mm-hmm. You know, you can just feel everyone's sick of, honestly, I think if you polled everyone in the pit area, they all want a rain out.
Sure.
You know, everyone's just, they're tired of being there.
Yeah.
And I think that dynamic I see it, man. It's tangible. I mean, from my perspective, listen, I know I'm sort of a rare case. I travel way too much. But at this point every year, I'm done with it. Somebody, I get asked all the time, what are you doing next year? At this point every year, I say, I won't do anything next year. I'm done.
I'm done.
I've had enough. Yeah. You know, I need some time off to recoup, because it is very, you know, the physical part of it is a lot, but the mental part of it, sure, from a race operations and race team, you know, perspective it's a lot.
It's a lot. Do you do race directors have to be liked?
What do you mean?
I don't know. Do you feel like that the racers have to like the race director, have to get along with the race director, or is
like? Okay, I didn't hear you right. Okay.
Is it light? Yeah, you can shed a few pounds, Scott, but I wasn't really gonna. That wasn't what I was.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I don't. I assume that I'm not.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't know if that's the right word. So the only solace I take is that whenever I leave a situation, you know, I move on to something else. Mm-hmm. You get the kind words that say, "Man, you need to come back here and fix this," or you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So in the immediate, you just assume that you're not. Like, right. I personally, this is me and how I do it and how I've always done it. I don't go hang out in the pits or any of that stuff, because I don't want to have to be, you know, like, oh, he was talking to this guy, so he's friends with him, and that's how that whole, you know, all that nonsense, because I've been part of it before. So I purposely kind of just do my own thing and then leave and then come back, you know, try not to have any type of relationship. So there may be people that don't like me because I don't interact with people, mm-hmm, but that's sort of by design too, you know? So, you know, that's kind of, I don't think it's certainly not part of the criteria, I don't think.
Yeah. I think it's a difficult job, obviously, and I'll, you know, an example that I had where, you know, even recently, I feel like, I'm trying to, you know, if I'm likening it to a sports official, right, and probably something that I know best, in some ways, it's probably like a hockey official in that action happens fast, it's all over the place, it's in a million different directions, and every penalty those guys call on the ice, for example, is at root a judgment call. You know, you have to judge whether or not it's within the guidelines that are written in your rule book. So I think the tricky part in racing is it's not 2 teams. It's 15 teams, 20 teams, 25 teams. Everybody has a different perspective. Everybody has a different history with one another. And I think judgment calls, even if you make a call that penalizes driver A, for example, there are still people in driver A's camp who are going to be mad about, or in driver B's camp about, well, you didn't penalize him harshly enough. And I think if we're talking, I keep the hockey analogy, one team gets a power play, they're happy enough, good enough, and in the team that got penalized, they're not going to be happy, and then we all move on. I feel like in racing, it's not that simple. I think even if you get the call you want, you still want more, or you still want something different. I can't imagine being an official of a race and keeping my sanity after even a month, let alone an entire season.
Travis, I could do a whole show on this because it's ridiculous sometimes how you know the what I do, and people ask, you know, like that when I'm say I'm leaving the Speed Bowl a number of years ago. Terry Ames owns it. He's like, can you train this guy to do your job? Like, no, I can't. I'm sorry. I don't know how to tell someone to just trust their gut. I trust my instincts on something.
Yeah.
I know, and you know, we've all stood on the fence of a racetrack and seen a guy maybe get into somebody and hit your buddy and say, get ready for this. This is coming.
Yep.
Everybody has seen those situations.
Yep.
Those are the instincts that I trust. I've seen enough. I've been on all sides of racing. One of the fun things that I get is, well, you've never raced a street stock before, so you don't know what it's like. And I say to them, well, you've never called a race before, so you don't know what it's like.
You don't know what it's like.
You know, that dynamic is, like you mentioned, this team's people aren't happy with it. I say to these people all the time, you're watching your car. You're there to watch your car. My job is not to watch your car for 25 laps.
Right.
My job is to officiate the entire race.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, there's going to be times that we miss it. There's going to be times that we may even get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, nobody's going to work harder to get it right than myself and my staff.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm my own biggest critic. I record every bit of audio that I do in any tower that I'm at all my racetracks, and I will play it back on my ride home and critique myself. And that's for no other reason than I just want to be better at it, you know. So there's no way to say that there's always going to be, you know, there's no call that's going to make everyone happy. It's just trusting your instincts and knowing that you're believing in your instincts. And the second thing that I would always tell someone is delete Facebook.
Yeah, amen. Yeah.
Delete Facebook from your phone. The first few years that I did it, you know, I had, you're on there and you're listening to everyone, and it's nonsense because it's the same people complaining about the same things every year at the same racetrack.
Yes.
You know, the ones that are successful aren't wasting their time on Facebook, you know, crapping on this or that. They're the ones out in the garage working on their car. So, you know, it's just you can have a Facebook account, but don't go to it every day.
Yeah, it's I had a conversation with somebody the other day about you have to remember if you're the track, if you're the official, even if you're me, right? Even, you know, I do the same thing. Like, there's a reason I go back and read all my stories because I read them and critique myself. Like, it's just. People probably don't believe it, but I go, oh, what was I? Is that really? Did I really want to, you know, open that can of worms?
Right.
But at the end of the day, I said to the people who complain on social media, on Facebook, you have to always remind yourself that it's such a vocal minority. It's such a small percentage of fans, teams, drivers, whatever group you fall into. But sometimes it can feel like it's everybody. It can feel like it's the whole world.
Yeah, and here's what turned it for me, and this is just a stone cold fact, is that I would have a guy call me at the end of the night and say, you know what, that was the right call. I didn't do that right, so on and so forth. Sorry to put you in that spot. And the very next day, he'd go on Facebook and say the exact opposite thing to his people.
Right.
And I would text that guy and say, "Why are you doing that? Mm-hmm. You just told me." And he's like, "I can't own that to all my fans and sponsors and everything."
Street cred. Gotta have street cred.
So that's I think in the true racers, they get it. Yeah. They know that there's going to have to be calls that go for them and calls that go against them. One of the things that I like to say is that everybody is mad at me at one point in the year, which means that I'm doing my job because nobody's getting away with, there's not one person getting away with everything.
Yep.
I hear it all the time. Oh, you favor Keith Rocco at Stafford or Thompson, and you favor this guy at Stafford.
Yeah.
When in reality, that guy's got the most penalties of anyone at the racetrack. If you really look at the hard facts of it,
right?
But it's an interesting dynamic of trying to filter through what's good conversation and what isn't.
Yeah. Do you like it? I mean, I guess the other side of that is, when did you first start thinking about, I could see myself taking this role at a racetrack or with a series?
So ran, was the aerodynamicist and spotter for Matt Kovaluk in the Busch North Series down in Connecticut.
Yep.
And the Mohegan Sun was our main sponsor, and they just said one year, we don't have the money to do this anymore. So I started helping out over at the Speed Bowl with Waterford Speed Bowl in Connecticut with Tom Fox and Terry Ames, the owner. Tom had left that same year, and so Terry offered it to me because I'd kind of basically run the races anyways. Tom was just sort of walking through the pits at that time. Yep. So really the only reason I wanted to get into it, I can tell you that the one time that it happened was we raced a Busch North race at Adirondack in 2007, sorry. Yep. And we were leading the race, and we got told we jumped the restart. Clear as day, we didn't jump it. You could go back and watch on HDTV. It was live at that time. The announcers even said, "This is the most heinous call I've ever heard." It was ridiculous to the point where, we were emotional driving home. It was an 8-hour drive home. The whole team of us was like, how did we get this taken from us?
Yeah.
Congrats to Joey Logano. He got that win. Yeah. But the reality was that we really, at that time, I said, man, I don't know. I just feel like there's got to be something you can try to get in this sport and try to make a difference so this type of stuff doesn't happen.
Yep.
And that's kind of where it all grew from. Wow. I kind of started going to the Speed Bowl that next year in an official capacity to try and, learn how the game worked.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty good. That's good. I didn't realize that. I knew. Obviously, I've known you for a long time. That's a great kind of wake up moment where you go, "This is what I want to do."
Yeah.
I don't have that moment. I just got thrust into it, and here I am still.
It's the love of the game. That's what your answer is supposed to be.
Yeah, that's true.
Your true passion for the sport.
Yeah, I've told many people. You meet people even within our own company. I met the publisher, I don't know, a couple months ago, and she works out of the Portland office, obviously, and she was like, "Oh, you're our NASCAR fan." And I looked at her and I said, "No, it's funny because I don't really consider myself a fan," which I think a lot of people will take the wrong way in this game, and I get that. But I love covering it. I always have. There's so many stories. There's so many personalities. There's still nothing as fun as when emotions boil over and you get both sides of the story. And I think for me, this is not supposed to be about me. It's supposed to be about you. But I kind of opened the...
No. No, I know exactly where you're coming from.
I think for me, it's... now that I've been doing it long enough, those guys trust me enough to tell the story,
Right.
Chris Thorne, it was casted a couple weeks ago, was racing second. The leader spun. They penalized Chris and sent him to the back for rough driving. And I walked he's pitted as far away from the front stretch press box as you can get at Wiscasset. And I walked over, and he was waiting for me. And and Chris is a guy that never, ever, ever ruffles feathers. But he was ready, and I said to somebody afterwards, I said, that's a guy that I've known for many, many years, covered him fairly, always covered him well, I think, and trusted me to tell the story. So that's why I like it. I mean, that's how I got started, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's my life. I've never really I played some other sports, but it's like I'm not too race car hipster enough to say that I like the Cup Series. I enjoy watching every Cup race.
Right.
I enjoy watching every Xfinity race. I enjoy watching every truck race, every dirt race, everything.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Right.
I can accept that. It's literally everything I've been sort of raised to do from my dad. So,
right.
To a fault, sometimes it probably consumes too much of my life.
I don't know what you mean. I don't know. What you mean.
Never. I don't think I've been home on a weekend since my kids have been born, and they're going to be 10 and 7 this year.
Yeah.
So during the summer, they rarely ever see me unless we rain out. So, but that's it's my life. So.
Wow, I feel like we just had a therapy session. That was good. I appreciate that. I've kept you way longer than the 15 minutes I promised you, but I appreciate you, Scott, taking a few minutes to do this. Absolutely, always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm not going to see you this weekend, but I will see you next weekend. I hear there's a big race in Oxford that we'll both be at.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to trying to be the guy that, leads like the important laps at the end and not all those ones in the beginning.
Yes, I think that's a good strategy. I think that's a good strategy. Well, thanks again, and hey, enjoy the rest of your week, man.
Yeah, man, you too. I appreciate it.
I did promise Scott that it was only going to take 15 minutes, and it took a little bit longer than that. But again, I think he had some great insight into some stuff, so I was happy to do it, and he was happy to do it. And Scott and I don't always agree on some of the issues in racing today at any level, whether it's national or local. But I always appreciate the chance to sit down and talk to people who at least have informed opinions and are thoughtful about what they're doing. I think Scott's one of those guys, so we're glad he came along. This is Loose Wheels. I am Travis Barrett. Man alive, I cannot believe the Oxford 250 is coming up. This summer has flown by. I feel like we've been talking about it since the podcast started back in the spring, but it's worth it, man. This is the best time of year. I say it every week, but this really is, if you're a race fan of Maine, Oxford 250 week is the best time of year. So we're here, and we're going to find out next week if anybody can chase down Kurt Gary at Oxford Plains. We're going to find out if Cassius Clark can finally win one for Farmington County. For Franklin County. We're going to find out if some of the guys we've become accustomed to over the years, the Johnny Clarks and the Ben Rose and the Mike Rose, have an Oxford 250 win in them still. We're going to find out if a new guy like Reed Lamfer, who's finished second twice in this race now, can finally get over the hump and win one. We're going to see Bubba Pollard, super late model ace from everywhere in the country, it feels like, but certainly in the Southeast. He's coming. Man, there's going to be a lot of great storylines, and I almost can't wait to get here. But first things first. So, Travis Barrett, I'm the auto racing writer at the Kennebec Journal and the Morning Sentinel. This is Loose Wheels, the auto racing podcast of CentralMaine.com. Again, check us out, CentralMaine.com/sports. Share the podcast with your friends. Get talking about it. Find me on Twitter at TBarrettGWC. And if you do that, you should be covered next week. And we'll see you guys soon at the racetrack. Thanks again, as always, for listening.